thus, tapaha, penance, vidya, knowledge, samadhi is also by concentration of the mind. Yavat is for as possible. Manaha, man. Vachaha, words. Srutva, having prayed. Virarama, became silent. Saha, he, Brahma, Kinnavat, as if tired. Maitreyo vacha, swasambhavam nisamyavam, tapovijja samadhi, yavan manovachastutva, virarama sakinnava, Maitreyo vacha, swasambhavam nisamyavam, tapovijja samadhi, yavan manovachastutva, virarama sakinnava, Maitreyo vacha, swasambhavam nisamyavam, tapovijja samadhi, yavan manovachastutva, virarama sakinnava.
Maitreya vacha, swasambhavam nisamyavam, tapovijja samadhi, yavan manovachastutva, virarama sakinnava.
Maitreyo vacha, swasambhavam nisamyavam, tapovijja samadhi, yavan manovachastutva, virarama sakinnava.
Anyone else? Okay, we did the word for word translation. Please repeat. The sage Maitreya said, O Vidura, after observing the source of his appearance, namely the personality of Godhead, Brahma prayed for his mercy. As far as his mind and words would permit him. Thus having prayed, he became silent, as if tired from his activities of penance, knowledge, and mental concentration. Srila Prabhupada's Divine Purport. Brahma's enlightenment knowledge was due to the Lord sitting within his heart. After being created, Brahma could not ascertain the source of his appearance. But after penance and mental concentration, he could see the source of his birth. And thus, he became enlightened through his heart. This spiritual master outside and the spiritual master within are both representations of the Lord. Unless one has contact with such bona fide representations, one cannot claim to be a spiritual master. Lord Brahma had no opportunity to take the help of a spiritual master from outside, because at that time, Brahma himself was the only creature in the universe. Therefore, on becoming satisfied by the prayers of Brahma, the Lord enlightened him about everything from within. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the 26th verse, 9th chapter of the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. I offer my respectful and humble obeisances unto the lotus feet of His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, who has opened our eyes with the torch of knowledge. Memor Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who has established within the material world the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya. Give us shelter under His lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So a real interesting verse here today. We see the uniqueness of Lord Brahma, the first living entity in the universe, the chief architect and engineer of the entire universe, engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead completely. The founder, so to speak, of our disciplic succession. Our disciplic succession stems from Brahma on down to Nara, to Vyas, to Madhvacharya, on down to Madhavendra Puri, to Radha and Krishna's divine incarnation, Sriman Mahaprabhu, and down to Srila Prabhupada. So Brahma is very unique that he's not able to take shelter of the disciplic succession. There is no disciplic succession. In fact, he cannot see anything. As we've learned in these verses, everything is dark. And when he traveled as far as he could go, it was scary. It was just turbulent waves, like entering into the ocean when there's a hurricane or a cyclone or something. Very scary. So he couldn't see Vishnu at that time, and he returned to the only home he knew, that lotus flower, and heard the order of his spiritual master to perform penance. And by his previous pious activities, he understood that, and he knew what to do. It was all intuitive, because the living entity isn't here for the first time, but there's some past. And Brahma has his past, and to assume that role as a Brahma, it's said that one has to perform his duties perfectly for 100 births. Then one can maybe get the post of a Brahma. And sometimes in a particular universe, if there's not a qualified Jivatma, living entity, to take the post, sometimes Krishna himself takes the post. Vishnu himself will take the post, play the role of Brahma. So our particular four-headed Brahma, he sat in meditation and tried to focus and understand the absolute truth, using all of his mental power. And eventually everything became revealed. He could see Govardhan Vishnu. He heard the sound of the transcendental flute of the Lord, which entered his ear and came out as the Gayatri mantra. And that way Krishna introduced himself, and Lord Brahma paid his humble obeisances to his spiritual master. The Lord himself, situated within. For Brahma, you could say, was also situated without. The Lord is also situated without for everyone. Everything's composed of his energy, and the Lord is certainly existing without, but he's not exactly close by. He wasn't exactly close by for Lord Brahma also. He was lying in the bottom of the Gopadak ocean, which Lord Brahma ran away from. And certainly, in Vaikuntha and in Krishna Loka, he's outside of the entire universe. So he is outside, though. When Krishna had to take Arjuna to find out who had been kidnapping some children in Dwarka, they had to go through the universe and meet Mahavishnu. So Lord Vishnu is he's outside the universe, so we could say he's outside, but he's not exactly close by. So Krishna is very keen and most intelligent, and he gives practically the post of God to the living entity, in the sense that, just like an ambassador, the ambassador is the representative of an entire nation. He's the representative of the governance of that nation. He represents that nation and has to be treated. And by treaty amongst all countries in our world, that embassy, that place where he stays, is none different from his country. And even in time of war, it's not allowed to enter into another country's embassy. And if there's so much enmity, they have to allow them to leave. So Krishna makes the arrangement that from without he becomes represented as the spiritual master, whom Lord Brahma became the first. So consequently, when Brahma began to create, there was immediately some ability to receive instruction on the absolute truth. Brahma gave the Vedas, and he taught them himself. He taught his divine son Narada. Narada became his student and engaged practically in the science of pure devotional service. He also taught his other sons, who all assumed big roles in the universe, and all Brahmana dynasties come from him, on how to perform rituals and Vedic rites, and how to understand the soul and practice yoga, and which culminates in bhakti yoga. He taught this to all his sons, and all his sons taught their disciples, and in turn they taught their disciples. And those disciples taught everyone in the world. They taught all the Kshatriyas, all the governors of the different planets, all the warriors and protectors that help maintain society. They taught all the Vaishyas that create wealth in our world so that we may live. And they taught all the craftsmen and art people who do the arts, and workers of the world, all taught by all these Brahmanas, the teachers of the world. So this role of spiritual master was given by Lord Brahma to his disciples, who in turn gave it to their disciples. On down the line from Narada to Vyas, who is Krishna himself, and Krishna's Satyavesha avatar, an empowered living entity to carry out some very specific and very important Lord. Vyasadeva was meant to take the Veda in this particular age of the cosmos, when people would become less intelligent and wouldn't have the memory, the prowess of memory, to simply hear the Veda through the line of disciplic succession from their spiritual master and be able to recite it perfectly. That was just not possible in Kali Yuga. So what was to be done was the Veda had to be written down. And that job was given to Vyasadeva. And his spiritual master is Narada Muni. After doing most of this, Narada Muni instructed him to write this book we study from, so that the science of pure devotional service could be taught. And then Prabhupada, our Guru Maharaj, put it into the English language for all the fallen conditioned souls in this world who, practically speaking, a very, very small percentage of people can read and understand and speak Sanskrit. So how is the world to become Krishna conscious if it was kept within that confine where only those who understood that language could possibly become Krishna conscious? So Prabhupada's job was a very, very big job. Consequently, some people attempt to label him a Sakyavesha avatar. But for sure, was Krishna's pure bona fide representative. Commonly, there's reference given to Srila Prabhupada being the general that was predicted by, I believe, Lord Nityananda or Bhaktivinoda Thakur or someone to take this Krishna consciousness movement around the world. Because the Lord doesn't take pleasure in simply being glorified himself. He likes to see his devotees glorified too. So therefore he empowers them to do things sometimes greater than himself, at least as far as people can see. For example, Arjuna, the hero of the battle of Kurukshetra. It was Arjuna who killed most of the warriors. And, nobody saw that Krishna in his universal form was killing them. And, Krishna saved the day quite a few times. But, it was Arjuna who was the hero, practically speaking, of the battle. And then there were, so many other heroes, such as Bhima-Sen. But, Arjuna was the primary hero of that battle, and he was completely empowered by Krishna to do this. Krishna didn't even fight. Krishna just took the role of his chariot driver. So similarly, Srila Prabhupada was given that role, and Vyasadeva took the role of writing down the Veda, instructing his disciples, appointing each one to take a particular Veda and teach it in the world. So on down to Srila Prabhupada, who made it available to us fallen, lowly, conditioned souls who were simply bound to materialistic culture, proud of our materialistic culture, and proud of whatever we possessed, like that. Srila Prabhupada was able to bring Krishna consciousness and make it accessible in our particular language, and actually teach it in that language, and then have his disciples take it around the world and teach it in the languages of all people of the world. So that way the spiritual master is without. It's just a matter of people hearing the teaching. We never hear it said that one becomes Krishna conscious by understanding Sanskrit. Although it's a great asset, it can be completely misused, especially by maybe I don't want to say especially by, but Prabhupada there's even reference to him making statements like they learn a little bit of Sanskrit and they think that they are greater than their spiritual master. And we see that disciples who were somewhat of a scholar left Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. how to prod or whatever. So that's not the, it's not required. Now that's not to say that people with, the brain for doing that and the intuition and the force of Dharma and the force of the super soul within won't do that. They will do that. Bhakti Siddhanta was considered the greatest astrologer and Sanskritist of his time. And, we have in our movement devotees who are quite adept at Sanskrit and who teach it and who are able to debate with other scholars from other lines of disciplic succession where there's still a great emphasis in that way. So it's not that there's no emphasis in our movement, but the major emphasis is given to understanding the philosophy in your particular language and applying it practically and becoming Krishna conscious. Because Krishna can understand any language. In Braj, he speaks to the animals in their language. He speaks to the birds in their language. And even the Braj Basis speak a certain type of language that people speak today, which is different from Hindi. So, Krishna understands all languages. It's the bhakti, and bhakti is something real. Bhakti is the heart of an individual. And that when that heart is cleansed, that heart has an attraction for Krishna, it has a relationship with Krishna, it has love for Krishna, and that person lives in that heartfelt relationship with the Lord. And, that is bhakti. In our Gita Mahatmya and the glories of the Bhagavad Gita, there's that one glorification, I believe, of the second chapter, if I'm not mistaken, of the Bhagavad Gita, where one Paka Brahmana wants to find out how one yogi has transcended. And the yogi sends him to a goat herder who had become completely transcendental simply by coming in contact, if I'm not mistaken, with the skull of one great saintly person. And in his village, there wasn't any problem taking care of the goats because the tigers and wolves, ever wild animals that we don't see much of today because we've killed them off in our killing society. But in those days, every creature was allowed to live, so the goat herder had a job of protecting the goats. But this goat herder didn't have to worry because whoever came within his area became completely peaceful and nonviolent. There's that one pastime of Krishna in the spiritual world, where one of his cows is about to be devoured by a tiger. And the cow speaks to the tiger and says, I'm a mother, my calf's at home. Please let me see my calf one final time and feed it milk. And the tiger has some mercy, takes the word of the cow that she'll come back after seeing her calf. So the mother goes home and feeds the calf and has to leave, and the calf persists on following, and finally the mother has to explain what's happening. And the calf won't let the mother go. The calf's going to go, and so they're arguing. And finally the gopa, the cowherd man comes. And the cowherd man understands what's going on. He says, no, you stay, I will go. Like that. So they can't come to an agreement, so they all go. And they present it all to the tiger, and the tiger gets his choice. He's thinking, oh, calf has soft flesh, be so tasty. But it's the mother who has the agreement. But it's the cowherd man who's there protecting. He's a human. He's persuading the tiger. He's offering himself. In the meantime, Krishna shows up as usual, just like in this world, and saves the day. Krishna persuades the tiger to somehow ever, he praises his honor as such a noble beast. Why are you going to eat this old cowherd man and his mother and little calf? So the tiger simply pays his respects to Krishna. In all of his nobility he leads. And everyone is always happy ever after in Vaikuntha and Krishna Loka, because there is no time. Prabhupada says, it is a place that is conspicuous by the absence of time. In this world we look out, we see a perverted reflection. You can look out in early morning and see how wonderful everything looks. But it's a perverted reflection of the spiritual world, because time will take its effect. And, a hurricane, a storm may come, everything may be devastated, everything's dying off. If we're not there to take care of it, soon there's a big jungle, and you don't know what's in the jungle. There's going to be snakes crawling around, and all kinds of insects, and eventually there'll be all kinds of beasts. So it won't be tamed, won't be domesticated. And in this world, everything will simply die by the effect of time. But in the spiritual world, nothing dies. There's no effect of time like that. So everything's always pleasant and always nice. And after evolving through so many species of life in this, in this human form of life, we have the opportunity to bring it into this cycle. And it's done just by hearing the Bhagavatam. Even in our ordinary language. English is not a perfect language. Sanskrit is a perfect language. It's phonetically perfect, and it's very complex in its grammar and way it combines and its verbal roots and all that, more so than Latin and Greek. And how English can simply takes languages from all over the world and takes those words and utilizes them. So Sanskrit can do the same thing. It's a perfect language. Devanagari, language of the gods. But even in English, one can understand the philosophy. Like our Jayananda Prabhu, he had a hard time even remembering how to say his Gayatri mantra. But Prabhupada eventually said it's not necessary. He tried to teach it to him himself. Said it wasn't necessary. Just perform pure devotional service, which is giving our heart to Guru and Guranga, the spiritual master without, and in that way, meeting the spiritual master within. So I have to close on that note because time is up for me. We're all ruled by time in this world, and I have to go.